Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode, and I am privileged to interview Gayle Hansen Browne, Reverend Dr. Gayle Hansen Browne. She has just written a new book called Wild Geese Rising, and I have met her through the whole open relational process theology crowd. Anywhere, I think I met you maybe at one of the in Wyoming the
Yeah, I
first
believe
time.
so. Yeah.
The open relational
Yeah.
process. I've been there 2 or 3 years now. I'm hoping to go back this year again too. Are you going back this year?
No, I kind of go every other year.
Okay.
And then on the
Yeah.
off year do something else. I'm doing one of the John Philip Newell
Oh,
retreats.
nice, nice. Yeah. So, Gayle, give us a little bit of who you are, your background, just a short elevator
Okay.
version of that, and then I want to jump into this beautiful book on prayer that you've written.
Okay. All right. I grew up in Louisiana, but moved to Tennessee in 1973. So I consider Tennessee home now, though we make a pilgrimage to Louisiana once a year. I am a mother and grandmother, and a wife, and an Episcopal priest, and a writer, and an editor, and a lover of life.
Wow, that's a perfect, short, succinct. Gives us a lot of information. So, Wild Geese Rising is a book on prayer, but I mean, a lot of it is really theologizing about prayer, and then getting to the last chapter, kind of more of the practice of the theology of prayer. But what drew you to this particular topic as it relates to open relational process theology?
Yeah. No, well, I think one of the first things I have to mention is it was my doctoral dissertation. And so
Yeah.
that's why there's a lot of theologizing,
Yeah, I
because
know.
my doctorate is a doctor of theology degree.
Okay.
Um, and I see it as sort of a beginning book. It will probably be followed up by something that goes more into the practice of
Okay.
some of the things I introduce and give theological background to there. But the whole reason I ended up getting a doctoral degree was because I have wanted to write about prayer for a long time. Being a spiritual director has been a large part of my ministry as an Episcopal priest, and before that as a layperson. And prayer of all types, whether it be spoken words, liturgical prayer, spontaneous prayer, contemplative prayer. And as I got more involved in what was an historically Black church and learned more about sacred activism as it was acted out by Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King, uh, I was interested in integrating all of those, and has been an interest for a long time.
Mm.
And I felt like it needed to be grounded in a theology that was open enough and expansive enough um, to be accessible to a lot of different people. And so I knew I had learned about process theology in seminary, came from an Anglican incarnational theology background, loved liberation theologies, but I needed to find a language where people could maybe enter that from different places
Hmm.
and not have to say, okay, well, I have to give up being a liberation theologist now in order to be this or in order to be that. And I found that in some of the work with open and relational theology of its being sort of an umbrella of being
Yeah,
able to do that. So that's how I ended up uh, finding Tom Ord. And then to study with him, I needed to do a doctorate. So I just
right.
got the doctorate to do the research for the theological grounding of the book.
That's great. Um, you in the beginning of the book, you highlight some of the surveys that have been done on prayer in America primarily, it seemed like.
Hmm.
And that was kind of intriguing. What how do Americans view prayer in general? Because if you just do how many people pray, you get what, over 80% of people in America say they pray, right?
Right,
But then
right.
when you start trying
Yeah.
to dig into, well, what do they mean by prayer, or what kind of prayer? What did the surveys first of all point out about
Yeah,
Americans'
well,
prayer
first of
life?
all, there were, before I ever started actually looking for surveys, I sort of was getting an impression just from anecdotal evidence, and either the people in spiritual direction with me or people that didn't believe in prayer anymore, that their understanding of prayer was basically the words you speak to God, to ask God to do something for you or for somebody you love. That was really a pervasive sort of understanding and a certainty that that was all prayer was about. Uh, so then I began to actually look and see if there were surveys out there and sure enough there were, and the surveys sort of revealed the same thing that I was experiencing anecdotally. And so that's why that's where I started where I started, because I just believe in today's world, and I don't think this is going to change. Everything moves very fast. The changes come very fast. We're always sort of on the edge of a new something, whether it's a new something that's good or a new something that we don't think is that good. Uh, on the edge of chaos, which can be, frightening, and also the edge of creativity. And so I think that in that prayer, we need to broaden our understanding of what prayer is. And there's a precedent for that, just going back to, as I talk about in the book, to ancient Jewish tradition and the early Christian tradition, when prayer was more than just saying your prayers.
Hmm.
So I think I had a hypothesis, and I used the surveys as a way of testing what my hypothesis
I see.
was, and it seemed to hold true.
Yeah. So the predominant view would be you ask God to do something for yourself or for your close family members. Is that?
Yeah, and I think that in different traditions that expands beyond that to giving thanks when we feel like our prayers have been answered, or in some traditions confessing our sins, and some praising either through song or stuff. But it's always words,
Hmm.
and it always seems to be pictured to somebody out there. Even if you ask, well, is God just out there? And people will say, no, 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 God's, in here and all around us. But when they would pray, oh God, as if God was, please come down,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that interested me, that there was even in a single person a divide
Mm.
between the God they pictured in one way and the God they pictured when they prayed.
Mm. Okay. Your title is Wild Geese Rising. Give us your thoughts behind the title.
Yeah, that came as I
And
write in the
hold up your
introduction,
book.
from a parable by Søren Kierkegaard, about wild geese, and he wrote it as a parable in a journal. But it is said that he based the parable that he wrote on an experience with um, watching wild geese at his grandparents' farm, and and so the parable has to do with wild geese that land, and they just land in the barnyard, and the winter is pretty mild, and so they stay through the winter, and then the next year when the wild geese fly over and honk, and they kind of listen, but they don't leave the nice comfortable barnyard, and the third year they don't even pay attention to the honking. And Kierkegaard used it as a criticism of Western Christianity, that Western Christianity as a whole had lost some of its wildness and its ability to instinctively respond to the needs of the world, and to be confined to more to the churchy things, the things that were church work. And I felt like that applied to prayer. And so so to me, what I wanted the book to do was to help set those wild geese bound in the churchyard free, to be more instinctive and wild about prayer, and how we pray and how we listen.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. I came to Christ at a Southern Baptist youth camp. I'd been smoking weed for a couple of years. My parents made me go to this youth camp, and I ended up having a very dramatic experience. A couple of months later, felt called to be a pastor at the age of like 16. And somehow or another, I don't know if it was my youth pastor or I just started going to the Christian bookstore, but I started reading. I've been a voracious reader ever since. And I really read tons and tons and tons of books on prayer. And it was mostly books that were written from an Arminian viewpoint on prayer. So like E.M. Bounds. Are you familiar with E.M. Bounds?
Not very. Yeah.
I read revivalists. And the idea was, like little simple phrases like more things are wrought through prayer than this world dreams of. And, the idea was that if you get in the prayer room for hours on end and cry out to God to do stuff, that God starts doing stuff all over the world. And I mean, as a teenager, I was getting up and spending hours in like intercessory prayer. And I had years of intercessory prayer life, where we were crying out to God to bring revival to our nation, and all these different kinds of things. And our view of God was definitely, we're coming out of a classic theistic idea of God, a God that can intervene in ways, that are an all-powerful God could do unilaterally. And, then I got into the charismatic movement and, praying for healing and praying for this and that and the other. And so I would say most of my Christian life, I've had an idea of prayer and God that you're arguing against, or at least arguing, I'd say arguing against, right? In some ways.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you write a dissertation, you've got to argue against something.
Right.
But I think that my own personal feeling about that is it isn't about arguing against. I think that's part of our problem in this world, is that dualistic thing that it's this or that, pick your side and fight it out, So I believe all of that, has some message in our prayer life. But I do believe that God is not distant from us. I do believe that God, through the Spirit, works within us and all around us. I do believe that the primary characteristic of God is love. And if the primary characteristic is love, then it's relational. And not just something that God sits in a room and waits for the highest bidder to get the best prayers in, and then will come down and fix it and go back and sit on his stool in his room until the next person who has a better connection praise against the other person, and then God, can you do that? So that doesn't make any sense to me, and it doesn't fit with the God I believe in. So I believe that's why I believe prayer needs to be more than that. Now, I think you can start off there, and my life started off, and similar to that, at least in picturing that, I was asking God for these things, or I was praising God because that made God happy.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a long time. I was probably in my 30s before I began to really hear that incarnational word that comes through Anglicanism, some of God being embodied, and that we, that Christ becomes who we are, that we might become who Christ is, and therefore that it's not a matter of getting the attention or having the best connection or presenting the best argument to God to get God to do what God should be doing anyway, but that God is always trying to get us to pay attention and to open our hearts and minds to be the instruments of God's peace and healing in the world. And that requires a development of prayer that goes beyond that. So I don't like to pitch it as arguing against something. I like to pitch it as saying, okay, well, so what is the God that you picture, and how's that working in the world?
There's still a bit of a critique.
Oh, well, a critique doesn't have to be an argument. See, I don't, I don't think it has to be an argument. I look in the mirror in the morning and do a critique, on where my wild curly hair is going, but I don't argue with it. I'm not arguing that there's something bad about it or good, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with critique.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I agree. I actually agree with your critique.
I think you can do critique without being dualistic in your critique.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think, and maybe you can argue and not be dualistic in your argument, but I think that's more difficult to do.
Yeah, so
because you're trying to win, and as soon as you try to win something, you've stepped outside of what I think prayer is about. So why would you do that?
Yeah. Okay, but let's still do a little critique here.
Okay, absolutely.
Because you spend a lot of time talking about classical theism versus an open relational God. So, and you actually highlighted a lot of things about classical theism that don't fit well with an open relational idea of God.
Right.
So we're talking about different concepts of God, right? A lot of different concepts of God.
Right.
What if you had to pick one or two or three things about classical theism that you don't agree with? All right. And then what do you like better about the open relation? Give even for people just basic 101. Here's classical theism.
I probably have to open the book and look at it to do that. But here's the thing.
In your own experience, what is it about classical theism that
here's the thing.
from?
But I'm going to pause a minute before I answer. Okay, so the thing about classical theism is it begins from a point of view that what is important is maintaining the perfection of God based on what we understand, what humans understand perfection to be. It didn't really exist in Christianity until as the more Jewish Christian communities, the more fell away, and it became more of a Gentile religion based on Greek and Roman philosophy. And that's why I spend as much time as I do going back to look at the other story that is also our ancient heritage, but that begins to fade out of the horizon as the church becomes, especially in the West, becomes more and more Western. And so the perfection of that means that God can't be tainted by us, which means God can't really feel what we feel. Okay. And there are all those big fancy words for all of that. And I just don't think that's that important. Let's just get to what it's saying. It's saying that God does not feel anything that I feel. Therefore, all the things in the Bible about saying that God is suffering with us in the Psalms or doing this, that's explained away as, well, that's just poetic language. God can't really feel, God can't really be moved. And to me, all of that's based on that perfectionist philosophy that comes from a Greek and Roman background doesn't really fit with the very Jewish Jesus and the very Jewish first men and women who were disciples in the church, who came from a background of really being immersed in God and God being immersed with them. A God that is influenced by what we say and is willing to change God's mind from time to time. Not change who God is, that God is always the loving God that is the creator of the universe and that we know in Christ and we experience through the Spirit. But that as God interacts with us, God meets the demands of love by sometimes changing the way God interacts with us. And that's all through the Bible. I mean, that is biblical. So I think that, one of the things that was important to me in the book was to try to point out that because we've grown up with this Western philosophical idea of the perfect God, we think it's biblical because it was used as an overlay to translate from the 13th century anyway on. It was used to translate the Bible through that lens. And that held up in the surveys that people would say they prayed to the God of the Bible, but then when they described that God, they were describing that God with the perfectionist traits of classical theism. And so one of the things was to show that's not necessarily so. And, and only in Western Christianity do we go that far with it. The Eastern Church doesn't go that far with it.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, the idea that, God is all powerful, controls everything, is a part of classical theism, that God can't change and doesn't feel, because if anything could affect God, then he wouldn't be perfect anymore,
Right.
any kind of, so you have this sort of static God who's so transcendent and outside of us and so powerful that can just unilaterally dictate everything on earth.
Right. And whose main aim is remaining perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that he, and it is usually he, will be worthy of love, which he doesn't care about, but has to be perfect, as opposed to a God whose aim is the kind of interrelationship that gives voice to things like love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability to the heart of God and to the nature of God, and an interaction that's interwoven in everything, and that it's an uncontrolling love, because love doesn't dominate, control, manipulate.
Right.
Yeah. So
and that doesn't make it a weak love. It makes it the most powerful love there is.
Right. Love is powerful, right? But it is vulnerable. And some people like to call it weak theology or radical theology. Some people use that language, but what they're taught, but I would flip that and say weakness and vulnerability actually is the strength of love.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree.
So you then begin with those concepts of, and I agree with you, the Greek philosophy has influenced that classical idea of God. And I think the open relational process thoughts of God are much more Hebraic and and part of pre-Augustinian Christian theology as well. You also then spend quite a bit of time talking about two streams of thought that are in the Bible But in Western Christianity, one of the streams has gotten more play, maybe to our detriment than the other. And those two things, one would be creation relational spirituality, which roots itself in more of an incarnational theology. And then the other one is the fall redemption spirituality, which tends to root itself in escaping this planet and getting to heaven, which is where the perfect stuff is anyway, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so yeah. When did creation relational spirituality is certainly a beautiful stream. When did you begin to make those two distinctions? I love some of the people you quote, from N.T. Wright to Jonathan Sacks, Rabbi Sacks. Hey, I had dinner with Rabbi Sacks one night.
Did you? Oh,
Yeah,
I'm so jealous.
I know. I spent a couple hours with him eating, and I was actually working on a PhD in the Hebrew Bible, and I ran my dissertation by him, and he loved it.
Oh
So it was
man,
kind of a fun
we'll
night.
have to talk more about that.
But yeah, you talk about creation relational spirituality and how its influence might have taken us to different places, which is some places you're trying to take us in prayer, versus the fall redemption spirituality. And your thesis is that fall redemption spirituality has influenced more of Western Christianity, whereas maybe we need to correct that over emphasis on that and find our way into some new places through a creational relational spirituality. To expound on that a little bit for
Yeah.
folks that are
Well,
listening.
first of all, in Western Christianity, I would say the other never got completely eradicated. The creational relational is certainly a large part of Franciscan spirituality, of being in the world and the world being a good place and the creation being a beautiful um, uh, creature of God in relation, brother, sun, and sister moon, or I probably have that backwards, but all of the things in Franciscan spirituality and Franciscan life brings us back to this earth and to God in this earth, a creational, relational theology. In the Celtic Christian tradition, the same thing is true, which of course existed uh, before the Roman Christianity kind of took it over, and then never died out, and it has been kind of coming back to life since the 20th century. So, and certainly in Judaism, the creational relational has held strong, though you even get some fall redemption there after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. More Greek philosophy kind of begins to fight with that there. But so all of that is where it began. It's what makes sense. We can make more sense of some of the things Jesus says that we just don't get, like in the parables and things, when we realize he's coming out of that creational relational thing, because original sin hasn't been invented yet. you know so so he's coming more out of that, and when we read it out of that, some of that really comes to life in a way that we miss and just end up scratching our head about, because we can't make it fit with original sin. And does that mean that, if you're wise with your money and you do all these things, that's what gets you to heaven? I mean, because the thing isn't really in the Bible about getting to heaven. The thing in the Bible is about shalom, peace, the whole peace that passes understanding on earth. And so when Jesus talks about salvation, when Paul talks about salvation, I mean, they are all talking about something here, not escaping this to go on. That comes up later. So I think that putting those names with it, and I wasn't the first person to put that. I got the creational relational first from Matthew Fox when he was doing the creation spirituality, And that's where he mentioned that before the 4th century. So that's why I went back and started researching what was happening
Yeah.
before then. And then Brian McLaren has done some wonderful things with comparing those two things
Yeah.
as well. So I think it helps sometimes to put a tag on it. But even at that, I want to say you've got to hold that loosely, because there are certainly some things that in the whole development of Western Christianity and the spirituality that has grown out of fall redemption that is worth not losing.
Mm.
So it's not a matter of I'm arguing for this as opposed to that. What I'm arguing for is an integration of the idea that this is a good place,
Mm.
that this world, God's creation, is a good place. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And there is wisdom and truth here.
Yeah.
And there is a oneness that exists among us and everything here. Then there's a goodness, and it's not something we're trying to escape so we can get back home to some place that we're really from. We're not aliens here.
Yeah.
We're part of that creation. So what's important to me is not that somebody sign up for this or sign up for that, but that they begin to open their own hearts and minds to some possibilities that are broader than what they've considered before.
Yeah. I was, raised Southern Baptist. Like my parents weren't big theology nerds at all. But they took me to the Southern Baptist Church. And
Mm-hmm.
so then when I had this radical salvation experience, I was discipled by Southern Baptist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, the discipleship that I got was very much rooted in fall redemption.
Mm-hmm.
The story starts with original sin, basically.
Right.
And then very Calvinistic in the sense of like you're a dirty, rotten sinner,
Mm-hmm.
and you're even a newborn kid is bound for hell,
Yeah. Right.
And so when I went through my big deconstruction, which was not all that long ago, Gayle, one of the books that really had a big impact on me was Matthew Fox's Original Blessing.
Uh-huh.
And I only read that about 6 years ago. I think I read it in either 2019 or 2020. And it so resonated with me.
Yeah.
And what was interesting though was when I was working on my PhD in the Hebrew Bible, I was doing work on the kingdom of God in the Torah, and I was exegeting the passages around the image of God. And one of the things I noticed was that the image of God is never destroyed. It's never eliminated.
Right.
Post Genesis 3, human beings are still in the image of God.
Right. Exactly.
They never lose that dignity. They never lose that value.
Right.
And the way I was taught early on was more of an Augustinian. Well, you did lose it.
You did lose it. Yeah.
You can't get.
And
There's no way you can ever get it back.
Was your
There's not
only
one
your
little
baptism was your
iota.
only chance to get it back.
Exactly. And so very much that total depravity kind of idea of human beings are just these wretched, dirty, rotten things that are just worthy of burning in hell.
Right.
But thank God for Jesus, right? And then this earth that we're on isn't our home, so our
so it doesn't matter how we treat it.
Exactly, is then to escape it, right?
Yeah.
And,
right.
Yeah. So so this creation spirituality was, and then the idea of incarnation and how God is interwoven in everything, and panentheism, I really began to resonate with that. And not that there's not fall. We we do
Right.
hurt ourselves and hurt other people at times.
Right.
We do need some redemption.
But yeah, I mean, there's still sin
Yeah,
in this,
exactly.
you know.
But to place all that into an incarnational type
Yeah. Right.
theology, and so then
Right.
to think prayer through this loving relational
Right.
God who is present everywhere, but not in a
Right.
controlling way,
Right.
those ideas then begin to move us into, well, how in the world do we pray now then?
Right.
If I don't need
Right.
to sit in my prayer room for 3 hours and cry out for God to do
Hmm.
stuff, and where does this prayer life take us? And so let's
Right.
kind of move from more the
Okay.
theology world into like practice.
Sure.
Where where have you found what are some, you've talked about centering prayer and different things. So
Hmm.
take us into some practicality things.
Yeah.
How do
Sure.
we walk out an incarnational prayer life that doesn't view God as all powerful and yet
Right.
is incarnational, and what does
Right.
that look like?
So first, let's take just one step back before we look at what it looks like to say that we've been talking about what God looks like in
Mhm.
this creational relational
Mhm.
situation. We need to look then like what the human calling is in that creational relational situation, because it's very different than what it is in fall redemption, where we are just pawns anyway, and so we're just begging God to change God's mind when God isn't going to change God's mind. But now we've got to go back to that understanding that we have a place with God, that created in God's image, and from the very beginning in Genesis, given a vocation to be stewards and leaders in this earth in a way that leads to shalom, peace. That God gives us that, and that runs throughout the Bible. Then to take that and to see what Jesus shows us, not just about who God is, but what Jesus shows us about who humanity is supposed to be. Uh, you get this real call and response relationship. Just like the call and response from the beginning of the creation, God calls into the darkness, let it be, and the darkness gives forth and allows light to be. And God and creation have brought this light into the world, and that continues and continues. And then you see in Jesus always stressing those same things, that the greatest commandment is love God and show your love of God through your love of neighbor. And that includes all kinds of neighbors. And Jesus makes a point of saying, even your enemies, you know, that you want shalom, peace for all of us, because only when all relations have shalom, peace, do we all have shalom, peace. So when you get that, then prayer needs to be also, how do I interact with this creation and with God? How can I bring to my prayer life not just my laundry list of things that I would like God to fix for me, but in saying that, to realize that as soon as I say it, God is seeking for me to also bring what I can bring to the healing of that. So that if I pray for, um, a family whose house has caught fire and they've lost everything they have, and I pray to God and lift this family up to them, then I also ought to be asking God, and what is it, God, that you want me to do in response? Is there something that I need to do in response?
Mm-hmm.
So that our prayer life needs to change, and this is where I brought in the words behold and befriend,
Mm.
into beholding the situations around our prayer and asking for the Spirit to lead us in how to befriend those situations. So if it's a prayer of praise and I am beholding how God has made God's self known to me in that sunrise, then I am also seeking to befriend God's presence in all creation and asking God, and how can I respond
Mm.
to this in a way that brings more beauty into somebody else's life. And if I am confessing something that I am falling short on, then I'm not just asking God to take it away from me. I'm saying, God, this seems to keep happening, and I know I would like to change this, and I want to do this better. I want to do this differently. Um, can you help me grow in that? And then to befriend that by looking for nudges of ways that I might do something different. Same thing in goodness. When we think of goodness as being all things coming together to work for that shalom peace, all things fitting, God and creation, us, everything fitting together, then in that goodness I am not only giving thanks for the goodness that I see all around me, but I'm also asking, and how can I bring that goodness into the life of the world? And if I'm celebrating the oneness, the same thing. So in all of that, it is that call and response, the behold and befriend, the however we want to phrase it, that becomes what is a life stance, not just a go in your room and do this and then come back out and just do whatever you want to for the rest of the
Mm.
week, but that I bring it to every moment. Like a few minutes ago, I said, let me pause a minute because I wanted to not just react. I wanted to see, okay, what is it that might befriend this moment of understanding and possibility. And so the more we do and more we understand that is also prayer, the more we begin to live prayer.
Mm.
And I think that if there's one change we need in prayer is to begin to recover the ability to see it as a way of life, not just something we set apart time to do. However, we do it. Now we also set apart time to do it. You practice things.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was a music teacher, and you asked me about the harp, and I said I play a lot of instruments, but none real well. She was incredible at the piano and organ, and I had to take piano, and she made me do these things called Hannon exercises. They were supposed to strengthen your hands. I hated them. I actually absolutely hated them. I wanted to play just something wonderful, And it was a long time before I understood that to really play something wonderful, I needed fingers that would do it, And so setting aside time for the practice of prayer, whether it's contemplative or it's the words that we speak in our requests or in our Thanksgiving or however, that's still important.
Mm.
But it is also important to bring what we know of that into the art of living life.
Mm. I love that. Yeah. It's funny when you talk about living prayer as moment by moment contemplative action, which is kind of your
Right.
thesis of
Exactly.
like living prayer as moment by moment contemplative action. When you were just sharing, a phrase came to my mind from an old Keith Green song. Do you ever remember a guy named Keith Green?
I'm not familiar with Keith Green.
So, and he had a song, "Make My Life a Prayer to You," was a line from one of his songs. What's funny about this, me remembering this line, I was a vineyard pastor. I don't even know if you've heard of that movement or not.
I've heard of it. I don't know a whole lot of it. I
Non-denominational,
went to a vineyard
charismatic.
church one time
Yeah.
to work on some things that had to do with community building.
Well, Keith Green was a secular artist in a very young age it had been the late 70s, and he came to Christ at the First Vineyard Church in Los Angeles. This was during the hip kind of the Jesus movement stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he started writing Christian songs, and he was discipled by a guy named Leonard Ravenhill. And Leonard Ravenhill was one of my early influences on this intercessory prayer life kind of thing that I was telling you about, where we would spend hours and hours crying out for revival. Leonard Ravenhill was a big Ian Bounds fan, and
Mm-hmm.
Keith Green was mentored by him. I actually met Leonard Ravenhill. I knew his son, David Ravenhill. David Ravenhill's son actually came to my Vineyard church. So one of Leonard Ravenhill's grandkids actually went to my Vineyard church. And so it's funny because when I think about that phrase, make my life a prayer to you, we could take that all kinds of ways. And you talk about prayer, 3 components: vocal, contemplative, and action. Vocal, contemplative, and action. And I think a lot of the prayer model that I have was mostly prayer and not a lot of contemplation, maybe, and not a lot of action. And as you've pointed out, that tended to be some of the long-term influence of Western prayer models. But how do we begin to incorporate what are some of the practical practices that you've found? How do I do not just vocal prayers, asking God to do stuff as though he acts unilaterally, but what are some of your best practical practices that help you move into this moment by moment contemplative action type of prayer?
Well, but I find that they have grown out of those times that I set apart for different types of prayer, whether times I set apart for verbal prayer, especially coming from a liturgical tradition, in addition to using just the spontaneous prayer for myself, praying the prayers of other people, and using, if I've got it, somebody's written down, for instance, the prayer attributed to St. Francis of Lord, make us instruments of your peace.
Yeah.
If you take the contemplative practice of Lectio Divina, that you can follow with any biblical reading, but if you apply it to a prayer like that, wow, there are all sorts of possibilities that begin to open up in your mind just for as you go through the day. So I think that is really important. Those set aside times, the time for silence is important for set aside. But one of the things in contemplative prayer that we often call centering prayer is a pattern of pause and release and return. And so the sitting in silence and the paying attention to your breath, and this also is true outside of prayer language and mindfulness meditation. And all of that is prayer, you see. And as we're quiet in that, we begin to learn that when we notice our mind wandering off on something, we don't beat ourselves up about it. You're not trying to get yourself not to think about it, because that's what minds do. They think, but you're simply noticing that you've moved to a thought instead of the breath, and you gently release it and return to the breath. Okay. Well, in returning to the breath, how do we talk about Spirit, Holy Spirit? We talk about it as the breath. How did Paul talk about the Spirit after the crucifixion and resurrection? Talked about it as an indwelling Spirit inside of us and all around us. So if we learn to practice that in times of contemplative prayer and in times of spoken prayer and in times when we are committing some action that we feel like is an action of peace, participating in a protest, say, or giving out soup at a soup kitchen. I mean, all sorts of things that are times set apart. If we begin to bring that pause and return and release to all of our things over here, neuroscience says we begin to rewire our brain.
Yeah.
So that we're more likely to bring it over here to the moments that I haven't set apart. So what I try to do is to do both, to set aside time that I do it. But then when I'm just going through my day, to notice those times when maybe I ought to just take a pause. Pause, and just in a moment, just maybe a breath or two, let myself release wherever my head was taking me, and then return to that moment from a place where I have like tried to feel the Spirit of God's love flowing in me. And that often changes my response. I've found it especially true when I find myself in an argument with somebody, that if I am trying to win my point, I am much more likely now than I used to be to realize that I'm trying to win a point.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm kind of losing sight of this person that I am in relationship with, that I'm arguing with, and they have disappeared into the background, and I'm trying to win a point. And so if I pause and release just with a couple of breaths my desire to win the point, and I try to feel that spirit within, of love within and without and all around, I'm more likely to make a better choice about how I re-enter.
Mm.
And sometimes that's to say, I don't think that I can continue to talk about this now. I need to step back, and I hope that we can talk about it again, Or sometimes it may be to say, I haven't been listening to you. I've been trying to win my point. So do you mind just kind of backing up a little bit, and I'm going to really try to listen and hear what you say? I mean, there are all sorts of ways to respond differently to a real person, another child of God who may be my spouse or my child, or it could be a stranger. There's another way to respond. And when we learn to do that, that is living prayer. And I think that's what Paul meant when he said to pray constantly.
Mm.
I don't think he meant to just keep saying prayers over and over again, no matter what anybody else was saying. I think he meant that because that was very much a part of Jewish spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
That Paul would have come out of, that Jesus would have come out of. You see Jesus do it over and over again.
Yeah.
In conflict situations. So does that answer?
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I was thinking, when I was reading all that intercessory prayer revival literature and stuff like that, I also still would stumble upon, like I read Brother Lawrence's Practicing the Presence of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I did start, I had these long, I'd set aside an hour every day, sometimes 3 hours, and just pray. I'd get up real early and do all these kind of prayers. But then I also started trying to practice a moment by moment awareness of God's presence all throughout my day. And because I remember reading Brother Lawrence about, washing dishes or doing just
peeling the potatoes,
menial chores, but doing that in the sense of God's presence with you.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that happened to me in my deconstruction was I was working on my own mental health and was in DBT therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and they had a mindful meditation component to that. And I ended up doing a 2-year training with Tara Brock and Jack Kornfield, who come out of Vipassana Buddhist tradition on mindful meditation. So I actually did their teacher training certification and completed that last year. And it was interesting to me to go through all the Dharma talks and all the things about mindfulness, and then begin to relate that to the centering prayer model, contemplative prayer model.
Right.
And so I actually have started leading both the centering prayer group as well as practicing mindfulness.
Yeah.
And that's been a really good practice for me to begin to integrate.
Right.
And then I love the idea that you bring out is, the beholding, the befriending. It's like every moment of recognition of God's presence, that incarnational presence of God everywhere at every moment.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are praying for a friend or crossing, the action component for me was, the work that we do for the marginalized or the poor or the social justice work or challenging injustice or speaking the truth to power. You brought out those elements of like Thurman Marshall, and I never saw the civil rights movement kinds of stuff as prayer. But if I'm hearing
Howard Thurman, it was not Thurgood Marshall, but Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King.
The disenfranchised. Which one?
That's Howard Thurman.
Was the Jesus and the disenfranchised?
Jesus and the disenfranchised.
Yeah. So what?
Yeah, Howard Thurman.
Howard Thurman, was that an idea that he had, that all of that kind of
Well, it's very much a part of Black spirituality in
is that
this country, and that's connected with activism. That
and
it
that's
that it,
seen
that
as
the
prayer?
activism isn't just about social activism, that it is a sacred activism that comes
Yeah.
from the gospel and is lived out. And I think that's one thing that Black churches have to really teach us that are in white churches of all sorts, because even in Black liturgical churches, I mean, that real sense was strong back before it was strong. I mean, it's stronger now among all of us, because we're just like, all of a sudden we're discovering Howard Thurman, and we're discovering, that Martin Luther King was not just a social activist, that, he was a Baptist preacher, and this was coming from his deep seated belief in
Yeah.
the gospel. And they called it sacred activism,
Yeah.
or at least a lot of people in the movement did. And it was different from some of the other Black activists and white activists for Blacks, that it really was more of a secular, type thing.
Mm.
Um, so it's not new. It's very old.
Right.
We,
Right.
we're just beginning to
Yeah.
discover it.
But
And so it brings us from that place within, and then what we do comes out from that. So how we do what we do is as important as what we do.
mhm.
So why you saw, Dr. King, was very strategic about the way he organized the different marches and sit-ins. They didn't just, everybody show up with signs and stuff. He was very strategic about it being someplace where there was an opportunity to really do something, and the people that were going to go were trained to be nonviolent. They didn't just hope that people would be nonviolent. They were really trained, and it really came from,
Mhm.
and it was the religious songs that they were singing as
Right.
they marched. The ones we call protests, or
Yeah.
those were religious songs that they sang. So it's not new, but we have forgotten it, and I think we desperately need to recover it today.
Yeah, I love that. Like I was at the No Kings rally here a couple of weeks ago,
Hmm.
and like that could be a movement of prayer.
Right,
When I was when I'm helping serve food at the food kitchen, it's a movement of prayer.
exactly.
When I'm doing creation care,
Mm-hmm.
movement of prayer.
A prayer. Yeah,
When I'm you know doing community organizing,
right.
it's a movement of prayer for justice, and
Right.
on behalf of those
When you're
who are.
eating dinner with your friends,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a movement of
a
prayer.
movement of prayer, so that the heart of God is constantly being manifested
Mhm.
in my interior and exterior life.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And when you begin to think of the exponential possibilities, if many, many people began living that way,
Mm.
there's really hope in it.
Yeah. Yeah. We could. Yeah. I still hope I still have a hope that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice,
Hmm.
and that, but not without us
But not without us participating.
in these kind of prayerful
Yeah,
movements of
yeah.
justice and action.
And
As
I think that's a part of the creational relational God. It's not just
yeah,
about God is so nice that God lets us do this. It's God created us
do
to
these.
do
Yeah,
this and expects us to,
yeah,
you know. Um,
mm,
that it's not just a pat on the head. It's this is how this is supposed to work.
mhm,
And so the more we wake up and think about that and find ways of helping ourselves stay in tune to it.
mhm,
And I think that's what prayer uh, is staying in tune.
mm,
And all these other things are tools of prayer. The words we say, the contemplative acts we do, the organized sacred activist acts we do, but just the living itself
mm,
is the prayer.
mhm.
And all of those things help us stay in tune with what the Spirit is saying. is
Yeah.
speaking to our hearts and minds.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. Well, I've seen, I think I definitely grew up with the Billy Graham gospel, and
Hmm.
I love Billy Graham still, but the but the guy that was the founder of World Vision wrote the book called A Hole in Our Gospel.
Mm.
And it was kind of written to evangelicals who had left out this whole component to the gospel of what we're talking about, creation care and
Hmm.
social justice and advocating and showing solidarity and alliances with the most vulnerable and marginalized in our world. And I just come to believe that you don't understand Jesus if you don't understand the gospel from the margins, right?
Right.
And and so this movement of hope for all people, equality and dignity for all people and creation and all living
Hmm.
beings is
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I really
Yeah,
think that indigenous phrase of all our relations just is important,
it is.
because I
I
mean
know
it means our relation to earth, air, sky, sea,
yeah. I noticed
friends, enemies.
you had quoted Ken Wilber as one of his books on his integral theory.
Right, yeah,
He has some
yeah.
fascinating ideas about human consciousness and its
He
evolution.
does,
And
yeah.
yeah,
And I think, one of the reasons I looked into some of his things, I was really trying to see, and I was getting a sense that in a multidisciplinary way, there are lots of people on the same track,
yeah,
you know.
I think there are.
Yeah. Like I look at some of the things Neil deGrasse Tyson writes, and of course he's a, proclaimed atheist, or at least proclaimed agnostic. And yet what he says is more gospel than a lot of
Mhm.
people that are, proclaimed Christians.
Yeah,
So
I would say I have a few atheist friends that I think walk out the life in the way of Jesus
yeah,
better than
right.
some of my Christian
Yeah,
friends. So,
yeah. Yeah, I had a friend that was she was a UCC minister, United Church of Christ minister, and then she got really interested in she moved to a place in San Francisco. They were right near a Buddhist monastery, and so she got interested in going to a Buddhist monastery and meditating and getting to know people. And we were both on a staff for a conference one time, and uh, she had been doing this about 3 years, and she told me, she said, I have learned more about Jesus from life in the Buddhist
hmm,
monastery than I ever learned in seminary. And I thought,
interesting.
yeah, that's true. You know, we we sometimes have professionalized church so much that we are in danger of losing our sense of Jesus in it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gail. I appreciate
Yeah,
you
thank
taking the
you.
time to do this. Thank you for the book, and I appreciate the contribution that you've made to this movement of prayer, moment by moment.
May God bless you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you are here and look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.